Welcome everyone, Costin here with a quick discussion video about Total War Warhammer 3 and about one of the main irritations that I genuinely encounter when playing this game currently as things stand. Especially with a range-focused faction like the Empire. Granted, the Empire does have a varied roster, but their melee units, their infantry units actually tend to be pretty weak with the exception of greatswords. Those are the exception, but not the rule. Whereas their ranged units, although not strong, certainly do work. Or should work. I emphasize the should part because more often than not, look at this battle. So I'm against Vlad, this is on legendary difficulty, and I'm about to take him out. Now normally, here's what I do in this kind of battle situation. Just to explain that very quickly. I would deploy my forces in, like, say, a corner, right? I would deploy them in a corner to prevent some of the flanking maneuvers because he does have a bunch of dangerous flankers. I would deploy them in a line, right? Line of range, line of infantry, basic military tactics used throughout the course of history, used throughout the course of Total War. And then I would use those to, I would use the range, I would lure the enemy to me and then destroy him, right? Simple stuff, basic stuff, no problem. However, unfortunately, that kind of situation will not work. The reason it won't work, and this is where things get genuinely annoying, to say the least. The reason it won't work is because Creative Assembly has introduced a patch to try and prevent certain abusive behavior in battles, where you could just stack a lot of range units and they would do a lot of damage, even if they were stacked right on top of each other. However, they've created another set of issues. Pretty annoying issues, where once your melee line engages the enemy units, is very difficult, and it can be very difficult for your own range units to shoot at the enemy. You can fix this with some creative deployment of your own units, but more often than not, you can fix it with some creative deployment of your units, specifically things like checkerboards or leaving your front line exposed or something along those lines. Like, for instance, here, I'm literally not even going to deploy an entire line of melee in front of my units. Instead, I'm just going to deploy them on the side. Because if I deploy them in front of my range units, the moment the AI units get too close is the moment when those AI units will tear me to shreds. And keep in mind, this is a pretty big deal because, for instance, my army here is a ranged army. I'm reliant on the range strength of my army to win this kind of battle. And frankly, I should win this kind of battle because I've got enough range units to snipe enemy heroes, take out Vlad, who is a powerhouse, defeat the enemy before they become a problem. In theory. However, in actual practice, what tends to happen is that a lot of the time, my units may end up struggling to actually get some shots off. Now, this is, by the way, a bit ridiculous in that Isabella has charged my backline. We could talk about the situation with AI, by the way, when it comes to their kind of behavior and the brokenness of it. Because right now, if you deploy in a proper formation like this, and the enemy charges you from the front, you're just gonna end up losing the battle. Like, okay, let's say I turn all of these range units around, literally, around, turn them around, and have them shoot. Try and have them shoot. They won't. Like, look at this situation. I have an entire bloody stack of range units, and they just flat out refuse to do it. Sometimes they get some shots off dependent on the angle. Sometimes they don't. But here's the thing, as the player, I would love to actually take those shots in this kind of situation. I would. Like, I'm giving the order, and they're not doing it. Not with Isabella, not with the others. And this creates a lot of issues for you as the player, because it means your combat potential, especially with an army like this, which is reliant on that combat potential, is significantly nullified. Right? And so, and I'm reliant on that range combat potential to win this battle in the first place, to really survive what I'm dealing with. Because it basically means a lot of my army is goddamn useless in this situation. It is a bit ridiculous. Like, I understand that there's exploitable behavior. And you don't, that creative assembly, what they're trying to do is they're trying to prevent a situation where players are just abusing it to an extreme level. But I don't think it's unreasonable to expect that when you've got an entire range stack right next to a unit with a clear line of sight, that they actually fire, that they actually use that range power, as opposed to you losing the battle, not because you can't win it, not because you don't have the combat power, not because the enemy is so strong that they can win it, but literally because your army refuses to work, refuses to actually do its job. Now, this creates a lot of issues, because you end up in situations like this where Isabella should have been dead in 2 seconds flat the moment I gave those, or she should have taken a lot of damage over there when I turned her around, when I turned my my army around. She should have died there or taken significant damage over there when I turned my my archers to take her out, and yet they did nothing. And so, as a result of it, I have managed to lose the battle. And the worst part is, she's probably still alive, isn't she? She charged right through my front line, and she survived. I countered her. She survived, and now, because also another issue with it, because they're disobeying an order to attack, right? Because they're doing that, another problem actually gets created in this kind of situation. The problem that your units are sitting around doing nothing, like literally nothing, in this entire battle. And by the way, this is not just an issue that the player has before you start, oh, you're not being able to cheese. No, it's an issue also the AI. Like, I've noticed this with AI as well, where oddly enough, even when they have a perfect good line of sight against me, they won't do it. Like, they won't take the shots that they are in a perfect situation to take. And just to be clear, this is an archer army. This is not crossbow. This is not a crossbow army. This is not a handgunner army. It actually gets worse when you're starting thinking like Jezzails, Rattling Gunners, the Vampire Coast, all that, who are dependent on those kind of units. It is really silly. It reminds me of what they did with how badly they screwed over cavalry and of any kind when they decided to mess around with the mass issues because the chariots were too old. By trying to fix an issue, they created one that was much worse. So an entire range front line wiped out without doing any real significant damage, simply because, not because the enemy is so strong. Now granted, this may not necessarily be the best kind of situation to showcase this in, but I do think is a problem, a major problem, with the way the game is currently, with the way these kind of battles end up working as we currently speak. That range units have already, let's be clear on this, I understand that the range meta, if you will, was a bit too strong, right? That the range meta of Warhammer 2 was not necessarily fun, but although Creative Assembly have certainly buffed melee units and have made that kind of playstyle a lot more, they've also screwed over range units because of this kind of behavior where they just refuse to work. They simply refuse to work due to that specific type of behavior that currently exists in the game. Now, I now have to worry when I'm playing a battle about this. Now, it happens with certain factions, it feels like more than others. I've seen it the most with the Vampire Coast, the High Elves, and the Empire, like you just saw there. This wasn't the first time, by the way, that I've seen this actually happen. But it's probably one of the more egregious examples. Because with the Vampire counts, right, with their heavy reliance on melee and heavy reliance on their hero units, because they are reliant on both of those heavily to achieve any kind of success, not being able to shoot at them in the first place, and your units just standing around doing nothing when you have a ranged army, is just going to destroy you on the battlefield. It genuinely will do so. It was horrible enough when cavalry and chariots had a lot of mass issues, becoming pretty useless to use in a battle scenario, leading to a lot of players just flat out not using cavalry because what's the damn point? Even now, with all the fixes, you know, the legacy of that still has remained. But now we're in a situation where we can't use ranged units effectively because they just refuse to fire in a lot of situations. It doesn't happen all the time, but when it does happen, you're just like, what the hell is going on? And it's like Creative Assembly trying to fix an issue where people could abuse certain behaviors, leading to more problems. Like, I've noticed them more happening to the AI than it's happened to myself, actually. Because guess what? You as a player, at least, you know, can position. What could I have done? Checkerboard formation, oblique order, diamond formation. There's solutions to this specific problem. Don't get me wrong, there are solutions. There are ways you can tackle it. But it is nonsense to see your range units just not doing anything in a campaign. So, as bad as the situation could be before, with the issue they were trying to fix, I feel that they've made the situation far worse than it already was. So yeah, this campaign is lost. Granted, it was not a great state of affairs. But yeah, it's creating issues with gunpowder units. It's actually quite ridiculous. For instance, with gunpowder units, how bad is this issue with range units in general? Let's say you're attacking a city. I'll just use that example. Let's say you're attacking a city. You bring a claw, for instance, or you're playing the Vampire Coast. You have artillery. You break down the walls, right? The walls are breached. There's a gaping hole. There's a clear line of sight for you to shoot through. And your units will do nothing. If you order them, they'll rush into an angle that will get them killed, or they won't do anything. If you position them in a perfect line of sight situation, they will do nothing. And this happens again and again and again in multiple campaigns. It is absolutely terrible, and it's absolutely broken. It's like, I mean, Creative Assembly, if you just don't want us to use range, if you just want to screw over range completely in the game, fair enough. I'm not necessarily too fond of the way range units have been in Total War for a long time. I feel they've always been too damn powerful. But the problem is the game is designed around the power they have. And it's like, if you just end up in a situation where you recruit a full range army that many times will be extremely effective in combat, but sometimes just flat out doesn't work, you end up with situations like that where you can't win a battle that you should win. Now granted, Vlad's army isn't a joke, right? He isn't a joke. He's got 3 powerful heroes that can be hard to kill. I don't necessarily have the combat power. But really, if I had been able to actually shoot Isabella there, she would have been dead. With Isabella dead, could have turned around Vlad, taken him out. So yeah, it is pure nonsense the way I'm seeing the current situation with the way the campaign, the game works. And that's, by the way, range units on a plain field. Let's not talk about walls, settlements, choke points, all those issues that do exist. Gunpowder units have the worst, but this happened with an archer army. Flat out ridiculous. And it's terrible when you have it, especially like your units just refusing to fire over formation of your men in that kind of situation. Even if you're ordering them to do so, Worse still, them just sitting there doing nothing when you've given them an order. That's actually even worse. Like, I would prefer them if they rushed into melee, but no, they just sit there, do nothing. I'm amazed, like, how terrible it is. Costin, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.